and I appreciate you folks coming out this evening to our informational meeting on a project that's been in the works for at least planning stages for about pushing 10 years now at least. And so this evening, our goal is to be able to provide some information on what we call a road diet. And we'll get into to that term. That's not a technical term by any means. And we want to be able to provide some information, opportunity for you folks to ask us questions, give us your thoughts. Going to try to be fairly informal, but we do ask, what we're going to do is have Adam Kessler, who's our assistant town engineer. Adam's going to walk through the concept plan, and then we're going to have kind of question, answer, and discussion period for folks. We'll try to keep this to our presentation for about 20 minutes or so at max. I didn't tell Adam that until just now, so we'll see if he adjusts that. So that way we leave enough time for some discussions. After that discussion piece, we'll be here to be able to, if you have any more very specific detail on a specific part of the plan, we can answer those questions as well. I want to stress that this is in preliminary design or concept design. Certainly has not been fully engineered. There's a variety of open questions, and you'll see that as Adam goes through there. There's still definitely some decision points that have to be ironed out and discussed further. But we wanted to make sure we got out to the community since we are moving down the process. Just a little bit of history. Back in the 2012 timeframe, so we're talking 8 to 10 plus years ago now. The town council, or excuse me, the town went through a pretty extensive planning process for Windsor Center. And so we refer that as our transit-oriented development plan, or TOD for short. And I will try not to use too many acronyms this evening. But if I do use an acronym you don't understand, just raise your hand and I'll try to provide a little bit of clarity. And so back in 2012, 2014 timeframe, with assistance from the state of Connecticut, the town went through a community planning process for town center. And out of that came a variety of objectives and missions. One was to be able to increase the number of housing units in town center to bring people here to town center, but do it in a way that was appropriate and scaled properly. And that would bring, what I like to say, put feet on the street. It'll bring discretionary dollars to town center, where those dollars could be spent on our local shops and businesses, and to help them maintain themselves, as well as hopefully grow and attract other. But one of the other primary categories or strategies was the area of how do we slow down traffic and be able to improve pedestrian safety within town center. And as you know, town center is kind of a half a town center. We have the beautiful Connecticut River and the floodplain, and then most of the residential properties and businesses are on the west side of Broad Street. So how do we make sure that folks that live on the west side of Broad Street are able to come over and enjoy all the amenities and the open space here on the east side? So pedestrian access and safety was a concern. How do we slow down that traffic? How do we also locate parking in perhaps more convenient locations? Parking always comes up, no matter if you're in Windsor, Connecticut, Windsor, Ontario, or Windsor, California. Parking is always an issue because we are a car-oriented society. We have plenty of parking. I would submit that we have plenty of parking in town center. It's just not in the convenient and located in very visible locations. And so, as you'll see this evening, part of the concept design is to add formalized parking on Broad Street, or Route 159. And so when we talk about Broad Street, we're basically looking at the project area is from essentially Sycamore or St. Gabe's Church. Sorry, I know the parish name has changed, but it'll always be St. Gabriel's in my mind, all the way to essentially the Palisado, Pequannock, and Broad Street intersection, or thereabouts. So that's kind of the area. Not a large distance, but certainly has a lot of activity and great amenities, both from a business perspective and from a community perspective. So the goal again is to has been set out for a number of years. How do we slow down traffic? How do we manage our parking in a better way, in a more convenient way? And how do we make sure that the pedestrians are made more comfortable? And I was talking earlier with Patrick McMahon, our new economic development director, and Patrick and I were harking back to how hard it was to walk down Batchelder Road 10 years ago. And we had, at least I did, Patrick didn't have, I had to think about that was, yes, there was no sidewalks the length of Batchelder Road, not at the causeway, not here underneath the railroad trestle. So the town has been making incremental improvements. There was no sidewalk on the entire length of Mechanic Street. And so that's in place. So now we've incrementally made those progress, and the Broad Street Road Diet is a big step forward and something that needs a lot of community thought, a lot of community input, so that the town council and other decision makers in town can make a decision in terms of paths forward. And so with that being said as a backdrop, I want to get to the meat of the meeting, and I want to again introduce Adam Kessler. Adam's been with us for about 3 years and has been the staff lead on the design. And I'm going to have Adam introduce members of the design engineering firm, which is VHB. And so with that, Adam.
Good evening. We have Bill Anderson, our project manager, and Charlie Baker, the traffic engineer from VHB, who they're both working on this project for us and kind of pushing us through this concept phase, which we're pretty excited to show tonight. I think we'll queue up a short video on the road diet philosophy and idea, just to kind of set the tone. I know it's always a good reminder for myself of what the whole point of it is.
And it's also, I'll add that road diet, this is not something that Town of Windsor just created. It's an idea that's been used all across the country and in other countries. And so we're looking to see how we can apply it here in our beautiful town center.
Here in New Jersey, we live in a congested state with roads that need to move a lot of traffic. It may seem counterintuitive to think that the number of lanes can be reduced and yet still maintain proper traffic flow, but under the right conditions, this makes perfect sense. The simple reason why is that 4-lane roads where through and local traffic is mixed don't have a steady flow of traffic. The left or inside lane is shared by higher speed through traffic and left-turning vehicles that slow down and stop to make the turn. As a result, you don't have 4 lanes of traffic flow. While there are a number of factors to consider, road diets have been implemented on facilities whose average daily traffic range from 2,000 to 26,000, with most roads having an ADT below 20,000. One of the biggest issues on a 4-lane road are left turns. When a vehicle is stopped to make a left turn, traffic can no longer flow in that lane and creates the possibility of rear-end collisions. Cars will weave to avoid stopped vehicles, which creates the possibility of sideswipe collisions. These situations create a more chaotic and unsafe environment. 4-lane roads also create issues for drivers desiring to enter the roadway. There are a lot more things that the driver has to consider, especially when making a left turn onto the road where you have to look for a gap over multiple lanes of traffic as opposed to just one. For bicyclists, the lack of a dedicated facility coupled with higher speed differentials in a chaotic roadway environment can create a very uncomfortable and unsafe condition. For pedestrians, crossing a 4-lane road is much more dangerous and challenging because there's more distance to cover at a signal. At unsignalized crossings, the pedestrian needs to identify a gap across 4 lanes of traffic, and there are multiple conflict points along the way. A road diet consisting of a single lane in each direction with a center turn lane creates a much more orderly environment for safe travel. Left-turning vehicles have a safe place to wait before making a turn, have only 1 lane to cross, and they're not impeding through traffic. This allows a steady flow of traffic in the travel lane and also eliminates the opportunities for weaving and crashes associated with a 4-lane configuration.
So that's kind of where we're coming from with this project. I'm going to stand up because I always feel awkward sitting at a table. So we'll start, I'll walk through the project starting at Sycamore on the south end of the scope and work our way north. Essentially, we'll start with landscape island median at Sycamore as you approach downtown, and create our road guide here on the northbound side. Southbound side will be 2 lanes by then already. We'll continue north, and Batchelder, this is kind of where we start our bump outs at the corners. And you know, when we talk about road guides and traffic calming and kind of serving pedestrians or other users of the road, it's very context sensitive and really comes down to what the community is looking for. And that's partly why we're here tonight, to get some feedback and just discuss the project in general. So these bump outs serve a couple different purposes. One, it chokes down the travel lane so that the driver slows down inherently because it's a slightly narrower road. It also protects our on-street parking, which you'll see throughout the corridor. Here are a few spaces in front of the public library on the street. And the other benefit is that it shortens that crossing distance for pedestrians. Generally, for when we're doing signal timing and whatnot for pedestrian phase, the assumption is someone's moving at 3.5 feet per second. Is that right? Okay. And which is kind of slow, but you want to make sure you're designing it for the majority of people. And with the bump out, you shorten that distance, and therefore you shorten the time. So your pedestrian is not out in traffic any longer. Your signal pedestrian phase isn't as long. And also it allows the pedestrian to see better down the road than what's coming at him and across. So again, as we approach Library Driveway, we have some bump outs here. This red shade we just put in there to kind of demonstrate and highlight those bump outs. They aren't necessarily going to be a brick treatment. Right now, just the engineers are looking at it, so it's very monochromatic and not lively. We'll get there further design.
That's not a commentary on all engineers, though, is that?
It's really just my point of view. I deal in shades of gray. As we move north, we get to the green area and Ace Hardware up there. So again, you'll see medians in the center and our left turn pockets for left turning vehicles, such as going to Elm Street. These medians, right now we're just showing them as potentially the landscape medians to kind of green up the downtown corridor. Other places have had success. I mean, in the video we saw just a dedicated left turn lane, which is one option. Other options are mountable hardscapes that are different texture. So if you do something that's a different color than the pavement around it, it helps to have that same feel of choking down your travel lane and slowing traffic without having a landscape median. So here, like at Elm Street across, we'll continue a bump out here to continue that neck down feel and kind of extend our green a little bit. On-street parking continues where we can fit it and where it doesn't conflict with driveways. You'll see in the next sheet, just to the north, again moving normally, that we have some of our driveways highlighted. So business driveways right now, Windsor Federal Savings, we're extending it out past that bump out. One of the driveways that, and this is something we'll talk about with business owners and strategize with local businesses is the numerous driveways we have on Broad Street. One of the benefits, I guess, of living through the pandemic is that, our little coffee house down there wanted to extend its outdoor seating. So they closed their driveway, that alleyway, sorry. It provided seating out there, and it was really effective. So that's one driveway that perhaps we talk about closing permanently and adding on-street parking in front of it. Again, that becomes a conversation with business owners. The other driveways, as you see, are shown. So you have, maybe one parking spot between those. Again, we have our left turn lanes being formulated for Maple and the entrance to the town hall and post office. This is a really good example of bump outs shortening that crossing distance. So now pedestrian, instead of crossing from this point to this point, they're just crossing right there, shortens that time. And as we move further north to the big intersection at the end, this is an area where it gets a little bit more complicated just because of the signals. But again, we have our turn pockets and some bump outs, redoing some crosswalks in there as well. Our line striping will end up extending up Palisado Avenue in order to establish the single lane and the turn pockets. And I think right now, actually, if we can go to that other sheet with the alternatives for this area, just to kind of demonstrate how there are still some design elements that haven't been fully fleshed out. We have two different concepts for that north area, kind of alternatives, where one shows, the landscape median that we have throughout the corridor, and the other, there we go. So this first option up here is with the grass median, which again helps to be a signal to drivers that your lane is to the right, and everyone else is going to enter on the left. But here we have the same kind of alignment, except we've taken out the median and shifted the whole curb line out, and this whole green area becomes an additional basically real estate to the green that's out there now. So that's almost a full shift to that curb line and gives us a little bit more green space. Of course, that comes with cost because we'll have to pay for a new curb all through there, but that's part of our design, working through a balance of new curb and old curb. That's generally what our project looks like from south to north. Further up Palisado, we just basically have our approach to the job. I think for now we can certainly take any questions.
Talk a little bit about the traffic signals in the
Right.
in dimensions of the lanes, and just to give a little bit of
Slightly important. That's right. So we have some traffic signals in this corridor, and part of our design here with the signals is basically all new signals, all new structures, new timing to support the lane configuration and the pedestrian crossings and whatnot. And one thing to know here is that this is a DOT state-owned road, so it's their signals. So there are some design elements that DOT dictates, but they always work with the local municipality as well. So as part of this, there's a traffic analysis demonstrating that our level of service of each intersection. I believe level of service is an average of B, which is very good for a road diet. The lane configuration in general is we hold about 11-foot travel lane, which is consistent with all of our, probably in the last 5 years, most restriping has created 11-foot lanes. Turn lanes can vary between anywhere between 10 and 12 feet, depending on the amount real estate we're working with. But generally, your travel lane will be 11 feet through the corridor with a 2-foot shoulder off to the side. That's pretty consistent with our local roads. Parking spaces are about 8 feet wide, deep per car, fairly standard as well. And I think if anyone has questions on signal timing and whatnot, we can certainly try to answer those with what we know now. And if there's any other questions, we're certainly happy to answer at this time.
So thank you, Adam. Very high level overview. As you can see, there's still a series of questions. It's not fully designed or engineered. And so we're at a great point now to be able to take questions that you may have. I would ask if you could, it's a little bit cumbersome, but unless you have a really booming voice, if you could come up to, we have a microphone there on the little platform, but let's be as informal as possible. So we'll go with this gentleman right here, and I'll try to play traffic cop, no pun intended. So.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the pedestrian interface with the roads?
And are there any specific questions you have in
Well,
terms
part of the problem is when they redesigned this whole center part in the 80s, they made the road so wide that people crossing, you've got an aging population now.
Right.
And you get 15 seconds to cross the road, but that may not be enough for some people because the road's so wide. So are you going to do something about pedestrian crossovers? Is it always going to be straight on the same level as the road, or are you going to do overpasses?
They'll be more or less on at grade crossings as they are now. It's just that the crossing will be much shorter with the bump outs. So by shortening up that distance that you need to walk across the road, it makes it much easier for a pedestrian or mobility impaired to cross the road in a safe manner. And that's kind of a theme that we've seen in road diets that are very successful. So the intent is to make the crossing as safe for pedestrians as possible. You'll note that in our design now, we don't have an island refuge, let's say, in those medians. And that's because how short those distances are. So right now, with 2 lanes in either direction, it's probably a 40 or 50 foot crossing for a pedestrian. And here at most of these crossings, you'll be around probably 30 to 40. And certainly a pedestrian would be more prominent being out in the bump out as well.
Sir, in the second row there.
Could you expand a little bit about traffic coming northbound down the hill? I don't know if that's still Broad Street, is that?
Yes.
159, that would continue to be 2 lanes coming north, and coming downhill, cars are going to be coming at a better pace, tough to slow down, and all of a sudden they have to merge into 1 lane. How is that going to be handled?
So as you approach in that direction, there'll be some new signage out on the street in regards to the traffic pattern and basically the loss of 1 lane. So as you approach traveling north, you'll see on the screen there that we end up carrying those 2 lanes through, and the right lane becomes a right turn only, and the left lane is a through lane. So in essence, it's actually somewhat of a safer condition than necking it down immediately just to 1 lane. So the feel, essentially that speed that people pick up down the hill, and that the median that you see there, the landscape median, as well as the signage, helps to signal to drivers that it's it's becoming narrower to slow down. But you would have advanced signage that says right turn only, with the lane configuration that should help alert drivers of that condition.
say you're on the highway, say on 91 or so, and there's construction in, ahead of you, and they narrow down one lane, there's always backup way behind that. And so this would be a permanent thing constricting to one lane. I just am worried that there would always be backup there, especially during, say, rush hour traffic time.
Certainly, as we go through, just to follow up, and certainly the gentleman from the design consulting team, VHB, can add or subtract from my comments. But as we go to the next stage of design, there will be the very detailed traffic analysis. Right now, as Adam said, the traffic analysis shows that all the intersections will work properly under the what they call warrants by the traffic engineers. But there'll be detailed further detailed traffic analysis. So we'll be able to take that condition that you explained, and we'll be able to look to see, okay, during peak hours, what does that create? And in terms of the cycling of that light at Bachelder and the Geisler's entrance, and they'll put that through a variety of scenarios, and that cycle time. So to see ideally what it have to be, not to create a backup that would impact the Sycamore intersection. And I'm gonna go.
Hi. Right now, if people want to go to the library, there's parking and a bean, there's parking on the other side of the dentist's office. So I'm figuring you're trying to take into account the future where people are doing this, not parallel parking like we have now for the church further down and all these other places. This would be head-on parking. Yeah.
This is parallel parking.
Well, I mean, right up against the road. Is that called?
Parallel against the curb, correct.
Okay, this looks different to me. It looks like you're turning in to spaces rather than parallel.
I believe it's just it may be a little bit of an optical illusion with that bump out, but basically it provides that if you're in this particular case if those spaces were in front of the library on Broad Street, you'd basically be able to turn and you still be parallel with the curb line.
Oh.
We had toyed with, just so everyone's, we had toyed with the possibility of having diagonal parking. I spent a few years in the Midwest, and a lot of those smaller communities in the Midwest still have diagonal parking. We've probably close to 6 or 7 years, we had a conversation with DOT regarding diagonal, and they pretty much said, nice idea, not going to work here. We're not going to buy that. We'd much prefer to have parallel parking on the state highway.
So it seems like the purpose of this is so that people can have parking, which I think we kind of already do, in the future when you're predicting a lot of growth.
Not necessarily. We certainly hope there's growth. We certainly hope our town center continues to be vibrant and grows in that nature. But part of this is to bring parking to some more convenient locations, where that's been a pretty common theme through all the community planning efforts over the years, where our parking is hidden. It's behind all the buildings, and folks wanted it to be along where the shops are and the businesses and where the institutional services are. So that's what the goal. It's two-pronged. One is it brings the parking to be more convenient, but it also has, as Adam said, it helps to create that visual friction as that road narrows. You tend to slow down as a driver.
A few months ago, we had a meeting here with the police and other people, and it was about the speeding on Broad Street. So I thought this was gonna help the speeding, because when two kids wanted to cross Broad Street around Wilton to get to the other side, how do they do that? It's not safe. People are, ever since the end of lockdown, people are driving like loons. And I thought this was gonna help all the way down there,
This project is just,
the center.
it's just for the center. I concur that, there's speeding challenges all across all 30 square miles in town, and many other towns around us as well. But this is just the focus is really on that section from St. Gabe's to the Palisado intersection in reconfiguration of that.
I still don't see why this, well, whatever.
Sir, I'm just going to the woman there, and I go to you.
Can you hear me or should I-
Nope, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, hearing about the backup, especially at rush hour, I live about 2 blocks away near the corner of Preston and Maple Street. And we already have people trying to avoid traffic on my street. My concern is how much study is going to be put in assessing the impact that this change in the central area is going to have on the surrounding neighborhoods. When you think about things backing up on Broad Street at Sycamore, and people taking a left onto Sycamore and then taking one of those other streets to try to avoid the traffic. If they can't go as fast as they want on Broad Street, they'll find another place to go faster, and that's also going to have a negative impact on the pedestrian.
So, based upon, and I'm going to look to the folks from VHB who have looked at what they call the level of service of how those traffic signals will work. But so I'm going to look to Charlie or to Bill to speak to that. As we understand it, it will not, unless there's something extraordinary happening on a normal peak hour, morning or afternoon, that there would not be that type of impact. But I'm going to let Charlie speak to that.
Sure. Once again, I'm Charlie Baker with VHB. There has been capacity analysis done on this road diet section. Capacity analysis done using Syncro software. It's effectively building a traffic model of the corridor, just to project how the delays and vehicle queues, how the intersections are going to operate when this is done. And as they mentioned, this is only preliminary. It comes to conceptual level, so things will change in the future, but based on the preliminary analysis that was done, the road diet is not going to affect traffic very much at all. Even though they're taking away a lane, the traffic volumes are not so high that they can't be accommodated in one travel lane. There will have to be some changes. The traffic signal timing will change a little bit. To provide more green time for Broad Street, but overall, the analysis shows that it's not going to provide much of an impact on overall traffic and delays along the corridor. So as far as diverting traffic to other neighborhoods, that generally only occurs when you're really increasing delays. That is something to worry about if we were significantly increasing delays along Broad Street, but the analysis we've done so far just says that it doesn't appear to be the case.
Thank you, Charlie. So the gentleman in the red shirt in waiting.
Has there been any consideration on the signals to make it, well, this is going to be really sacrilegious, I guess, for us here, but to not have to press a button and sit there until such time as the thing changes, and when it changes, everybody's already jaywalked across the street. So now you've got nobody there and the light changes. I grew up in a place unnamed where if the traffic is going that way, pedestrians can walk that way. The disadvantage is that if a car makes a right turn, it can take you out, but it's not supposed to. So the question is there any consideration for how we're going to run the signals relative to pedestrians and cars and pressing buttons and that stuff?
That's an excellent question. And town manager, if he was running the signals, it'd be chaos. So I'm going to look to I'm gonna look to either, the expert in that field to be able to talk. And part of that is controlled by, this is a DOT road as much as, I hate to say that all the time, but I'm gonna let Charlie speak a little bit to the mechanics of and how the DOT allows us to time signals and pedestrians.
Sure. That's a good question. I think what you're talking about, for everyone who's not familiar, there's two types of pedestrian phasing at signalized intersection. One is exclusive, where, as you mentioned, you push a button, wait for the phase to come up, and then all vehicle traffic at the intersection has to stop, and then pedestrians can cross in any direction they want. That's what people in Connecticut are probably most familiar with, because most intersections in our state have traditionally been programmed that way. The other method is concurrent pedestrian phasing, where on this corridor, if that was done, you would cross concurrently with vehicle traffic. When Broad Street has a green, pedestrians are allowed to cross on the side streets. And when the side street has a green, pedestrians are allowed to cross Broad Street. That is much more common in other states, and Connecticut DOT has recently become much more open to that idea. They're encouraging municipalities and state signals to change to concurrent pedestrian phasing where it's appropriate. There's been a lot of research that concurrent pedestrian phasing is as safe or even safer than exclusive if it's done in the right situation. So there has not been a decision made yet on this corridor what type of pedestrian phasing is going to be done. It does look like these intersections are reasonable candidates to change to concurrent pedestrian phasing. The benefits to that, as you mentioned, are that if you push, a lot of times with exclusive, somebody pushes a button and then just decides to cross without waiting for the phase, and then all vehicles have to stop for no reason. I've done that too. Whereas with concurrent, there's a lot less delays for pedestrians because Broad Street has a green most of the time. If you're just crossing a side street and you're walking along Broad Street, you get there, if Broad Street has a green, you can cross right away. You don't have to wait for the phase. If you're crossing two directions, you can cross whichever direction has a green at the time and then wait for the phase to change and then cross the other direction. So it has its advantages for pedestrians in that there's a lot less delays. Has its advantages for vehicles because, again, there's a lot less delays. All cars at the intersection don't have to stop for 30 seconds whenever one person wants to cross the intersection. And as far as safety, benefits to safety, there's a lot of theories as to why concurrent pedestrian phasing, where people are crossing the road at the same time as vehicles. A lot of people think intuitively that that's dangerous, but a lot of research shows that it's really not any more dangerous. One of the reasons for that is that with exclusive, a lot of time people don't want to wait and they cross the road when they're not supposed to. Whereas with concurrent, there are a lot more opportunities for you to cross. There's a lot less chance of somebody jaywalking, and vehicles, turning vehicles just have to yield to them. Everyone gets used to that. So that is something we're going to be considering in this area. As I mentioned, because they are state-owned signals, DOT will have to, will be the one that makes the final decision on that. But they are open to the idea, and that's something we'll be looking into.
I'm going to go to in the third row, I guess, with the red. And then we'll make that triangle there.
Okay, I speak from experience. Does right turn on red, where they're supposed to stop first? They do not. I've been in the middle of an intersection. They turned on red without stopping first, came within inches of hitting me and blowing their horn at me because they wanted to turn. That's a dumb idea. I'm sorry.
That is one of the downsides of the concurrent. So in the green sweater there.
I have two questions, actually. The first one, when you were doing your count, did you include the proposed 100 condos, I believe, that have been proposed, and I guess it's a done deal? That'll be 100 more cars that will be right in the center of town. Was that included in your count?
No, those, our counts were done in the last few years. I think we actually got counts. We confirmed our previous counts from 8 years ago, right before the pandemic started and everybody stopped driving. And at that time, that proposal on the north end of town, Broad Street wasn't proposed, so it wouldn't be factored in.
But we did, I'm gonna amend that slightly. We did, when we did the initial, we had built in generically some growth. It was not necessarily at that location, but that we did have growth in those traffic counts from that 2000, whatever year that would be, 19 in that vicinity. So it wasn't specifically to as detailed to the corner of Palisado in Pequannock, but there was generally growth built into those projections. As we go to the, and I just say that project, although very exciting concept, it is not a done deal yet. There's still a lot of steps to go for the redevelopment of Arthur's Plaza. But there is, so as they get into the next stage, now that that's a concept, they'll be able to actually take that information as proposed and put that into the software modeling and be able to get a little more detailed how that would be impact that, not only that intersection, but the whole corridor.
And second question.
Yes.
Emergency vehicles, that to me would be a problem if it was at prime time and all these bump outs were there, so everyone's reduced down. How are the emergency vehicles going to get through?
That is an excellent question. It's a question that is paramount in all the engineers as they look at that. So there's a couple ways that other communities have raised that. First all, almost all signals now have what they call preemption. Couldn't think of that, Richard. Thank you very much. It allows for the I want to say predetermination, but I can't even say that word either. But allows the approaching fire truck, or in some cases ambulances, to be able to preempt that signal, which converts it from red, yellow to green in a safe manner. Other way, this is one of the questions that Adam had stated, was you can perhaps not, instead of having raised medians, landscape medians in the center, like we have now when you go down in front of the Plaza building, they could be more flush or slightly raised. And so that way there, the vehicles could pull over to the side where the parallel parking is. Now would allow the fire apparatus or emergency vehicle to be able to go down the center, left-hand turn lane, or partially where that mountable, low flush area. You might if you go over by Elizabeth Park and on the West Hartford side, they have some of that same concepts built in, but certainly is a consideration whenever we do any type of traffic calming discussions.
Well, the flatness, to me, I can see a motorist who is very irked about being stopped and had an emergency in their brain would use that flat area and bypass.
Yep, that's that.
That to me is.
Yep. So usually you'll see it'll be a different texture. It might have, again, some drivers, yes, others are. So, but it certainly is a very good point to be raised and continue to have that, that conversation of how that gets addressed. It's a relatively short distance. And so that is one thing, if we will, in our favor. And there are opportunities to address it, as I say, with different type of materials. I'm gonna go to Mr. Doe.
Can I just hear a little more about the bump outs, how they're going to be configured? I mean, the grading is going to be about the same as the sidewalk right now. They're going to be curbing around them. Is there any kind of thought to really make them visible, substantial, so they aren't being run over or something like that? I mean, obviously they're going to be the thing that keeps everything going pretty well.
Right, so those bump outs are all, the concept now is that there would be a continuation of that sidewalk elevation. So, full 6-inch curb around the perimeter. So it'd be really just that continuation of the pedestrian side.
Ideally with a granite material. That's
Looks like a great idea.
So I think I'm going to go to some folks who a second chance.
Has there been any consideration of the tractor trailer traffic, specifically the tractor trailers that are making deliveries to Geisler's, True Value? Typically, when the True Value truck shows up, they pull all the way across Broad Street and back into the parking lot. Will they have the clearance to make that turn, either backing into or pulling out of, and being able to go either north or south? Same thing with the Geisler's trucks.
So Adam,
Right,
or
so part of our effort here is to check the turning movements of essentially the vehicles that access businesses and the side streets today. So we're not impacting that. The Geisler driveways will operate as they do now. One thing we've been talking about as we move forward with the design is that particular bump out, possibly doing some type of a treatment there so that we don't have the condition that exists now where it's broken up concrete and brick. So just as we look at signal timings and each intersection gets a look at the turning movement, making sure a design vehicle can access each of these areas. Traditionally, our turning movement analyses are fairly conservative in nature. I've certainly seen a tractor trailer make movements that I would never ever think to try to model in AutoCAD. So it is a fairly conservative approach, and no matter what, we certainly look at it from our largest fire apparatus as well to make sure that has access everywhere that it needs to.
so in this particular case, which we all know that entrance to the alongside the hardware store is a challenge, but we all use it coming in and out. No matter how hard it is, we always seem to be drawn to that. So that may be, we asked a previous question that question responded was the curb would be 5 to 6 inches reveal. In that particular turn, it may be different. It may be more of a beveled, maybe something lower. So because we know that turn is going to be made, and there's no way that we could, in working with those businesses, close that driveway. It would not work, and we wouldn't even propose that. So we may have that, just to modify Adam's earlier question about the 6 inch, that may be one of those curbs that is more of a flush on part of that. So it won't be necessarily uniform. All right, we're going to go around for a second. Here we go.
Okay. So the purpose of this whole thing is to have visible parking. That's, I think, what I'm getting from this whole thing. So where the bump outs are, how is that going to affect snow plowing? How much is it going to cost us? And are there going to be meters? So 4 questions. No, 3. Snow plows, the cost, and meters.
So thank you for the questions, because we do get snow. Well, this year we didn't get a ton of it, but it was enough to be a pain, wasn't it? Those are conversations that would be had with the Connecticut DOT, but conceptually, DOT would be responsible for, like they are today, for the travel lanes and the turn lanes. Other communities across the state have, that I'm aware have worked where then the local locality is responsible for making those passes and those cleaning out the parking, those bump out areas. And so, so that's a balance. That would be, if you looked at that, we would most likely the town very well could be responsible for doing snow removal in those parallel parking pockets, if you will, with the state being responsible for the through lanes and the turn lanes. Not like when we have some really heavy winters, it's not unlike we've done over the years where our public works department have come in to widen and go curb to curb, where we actually will bucket out the snow, or we'll use our large snow blower equipment. So not unlike that. Obviously, it would be more frequent just because of the nature of the bump outs. There has been no discussion relative to any type of paid or metered parking. So that would be a conversation that has not been raised. Thank you very much for raising it, but it has not been any in our thoughts. If we got to that point, that means our town center is humming. That means we are successful as all get out. And that may not be the worst thing in the world, but certainly not something that is in the near term in terms of thinking.
So just to have these things visible is gonna cost us how much just to have visible parking? How much is that gonna cost the town?
So it's you need to look at it as the entire package, because the goal is not simply to have visible parking. The goal is pedestrian safety, slowing down the traffic, bringing parking to a convenient location for our businesses and their patrons, and to ultimately to enhance and increase the vitality of our town center. So when you look at, we're talking about a significant amount of repaving, basically repaving the entire width of the road from St. Gabriel's all the way down to the northern end. We're looking at, depending upon the treatment of, are there bricks, is it stamped concrete, granite, all those decisions. And we have how many traffic signals? At least 3, if not 4, that will have to be modified. We are looking at about 5, I believe the working number in today's world is about $500,000 for each traffic signal. That's total new structure, new software, new electronics for each of those signals. So that in itself is between $1.5 and $2 million for the signals. And then when you do all the other paving, curbing work, there is some drainage relocation for stormwater drainage. The preliminary estimate, including a contingency factor and inflation factor, is about $4.2 million. And so
State help with that, being a state road?
the excellent question. So right now, there is a variety of possible funding sources. And so at this point, through the efforts of State Representative Garibay, the state has committed $1.2 million. 200,000 of that 1.2 million would be for the final design, to answer a lot of the questions that you folks have asked this evening, and to get to a point of a construction documentation which could be used for bidding purposes. And then, so the remaining $1 million would be able to go towards the construction cost. There's a possibility, and this is a question that the town council would need to consider and make that decision, is the town is receiving federal American Rescue Funds. And so this would be a project that's eligible for use of some of those dollars. And then there is the opportunity through either competitive grants or otherwise to go to the state for additional funding above and beyond the 1.2 million that they've committed to this point. I'm not saying that the town of Windsor would not consider putting local dollars in. This is a project that's been in, as I mentioned earlier, 10, 12 plus years. And it does have the opportunity to help transform our town center. And so I don't want to say that it would be all grant funds. I don't want to say that it would be majority local funds. But I would be remiss if I said that there wouldn't perhaps not be a local, quote unquote, local match above and beyond those federal dollars. So there's a lot of discussions to be had. So I'm going to go to questions. I believe you had a question back. Yes.
Yeah, I haven't heard any discussion about how the plan would make Windsor Center more bicycle friendly or safer.
Yep. That is a question that has been debated, and I'm going to let Adam talk about that, because we did do a scenario, and I'm not sure if this image will show it well, but it's a balance of all all the different elements we've talked about this evening, but we have taken a look at how bike safety might be accommodated.
Yeah, so we, during the last few months, we've taken a special interest in vetting the idea of bike lanes or some type of bike facility through this corridor. Again, it kind of comes back to that context situation that I spoke about earlier. The initial goal of this road diet for the TOD study was to provide on-street parking, slow traffic, and increase pedestrian safety. When you add in bicycle facilities such as bike lane, which this image here is kind of a study on it, you kind of have to give up something in order to add that. And in this case, we end up losing on-street parking. So this, at least on one side. So this concept is, north side of the project. And here's our existing curb line that runs here. And this red area represents basically what would be taken out in order to add parking along with this bike lane here that's shown. So in effect, we end up eating into our existing green in order to increase the real estate available to us to provide parking, bike lane, travel lane, median, and then the same thing on the other side. So here you see a bike lane, sort of, I'm not sure how well it's shown, parallel to the parking spaces. When it comes to bike lanes in a shared sense, at the same grade as your travel lane and parking, you need to provide some type of a buffer, 2 to 3 feet between the parking and your bicycle facility and the travel lane as well. The reason for on the parking side is what they call dooring, when somebody flings open their door and the cyclist hits the door. I think on the travel side, it's pretty obvious why you want a little bit of a buffer. So that can take up a lot of space. I mean, generally, I think guidance is about maybe a 5-foot width for a bike lane, but that's not necessarily very safe. I would hedge my bets at 6 or 7 feet instead. The other consideration when it comes down to bikes is what's the user aiming for? Are you looking for the bike commuter? Then like downtown Hartford or West Hartford can do a lot with bike lanes because of the commuting population that's using those facilities. I wouldn't necessarily put my 5-year-old in that same bike lane because, for obvious reasons, she's all over it. So then we get into a conversation about what if we did a multi-use path at a different elevation, kind of sidewalk grade next to the Broad Street, to create that safe environment for pedestrians, bicyclists, families, and users that just aren't comfortable with riding on the road. And again, we get into a conversation of either you're giving up parking or you're eating into your green space. And that's just on our side where we actually own land. So we've looked at that, and I think in this context, in this situation, we've ruled it out at this point and are kind of sticking with the original goals: pedestrian safety, some on-street parking, and reducing speeds. It really just comes back to kind of balancing your needs and wants with what kind of real estate we have out there.
I'm going to go back to the gentleman here.
One of the things I'm trying to identify here is the businesses that are in the downtown. There aren't a lot of businesses right now that require that type of on-street parking. You've got the bank has parking in the back, the post office, the CVS has parking in that little area. For what purpose would all this money be spent to help what businesses with this parking?
I'm going to take an additional thought of that, and then I'd love to be able to hear from Patrick McMahon, our Economic Development Director. There's what we have happening in in Windsor Center is a lot of different uses on the first floor. If you think of the space between Maple Avenue going north on the west side. And I wish I had the image with me. I had an image from a couple months ago, a meeting, but it showed the vibrancy of the retail along the first lower level of those buildings on that west side. What we have now is a lot of, I'll say, service type of uses. And part of the goal here is to be able to provide opportunities for a mix of uses. You've got, so not just simply the optometrist or the driving school, not saying that those aren't good businesses and viable businesses, but how they can create an opportunity for different type of businesses to locate here. And so those landlords have a viable, marketable property. And so, because we know things change. We know places become vacant, and how do we make sure that we're creating and helping to create an environment that we can have a good mix of businesses here. And Patrick, I'm not sure if you want to add to that or.
Yeah, it really comes down to convenience. It is really helpful to have on-street parking that does rotate during the course of the day, very close to the front entrances to the different businesses.
So what businesses are these though? I can't name them.
So that you've seen certainly the Bean and Taste of India. When it's open, right now, it was the problem it's been most recently is because of COVID. They haven't had the buffet that they had in the past, but hopefully that will come back into play. And so that will be a more active location. And as Peter said, we're hoping that at some time there'll be some turnover where some of that professional office could go to a more a location that doesn't require that sort of storefront presence that could then be more destination retail or restaurants. But we're not going to get there unless we have those options relative to parking. And even more so than the parking that's getting added here, it's really those bumpouts. Okay. Being from Windsor back to the town hall, I go across the street all the time to Subway, for instance, or over to the Bean. And truly, there's times where I feel like I'm taking my life in my hand. There are folks that are driving way beyond what the speed limit is. And that's not indicative of Windsor. That happens in downtown locations all over the place. But if we can narrow these travel lanes, slow down that traffic where right now there's through traffic. They're trying to get to a place and move on. We want it in a downtown and vibrant location where they're actually traveling a little slower. And then they see CVS and they go, oh, I need to get this, or I'm going to grab that coffee. And there's studies that basically do show that slower traffic is going to result in higher sales for the businesses downtown.
And another dynamic is, I do it fairly often. I'll go to Windsor Federal, I'll do my business, I'll get back in my truck, and I'll drive over to CVS. I'm an able, knock on wood, I'm still able-bodied individual, but if, had a convenient location to park on the street, I could do maybe 3 stops. I wouldn't have to be driving back and forth. And so there's all sorts of different dynamics there. And certainly folks have been here in this town a lot longer than I have. Remember how Windsor Center has been. Retail world has changed. Absolutely has changed. It's not going to be the same thing as it was 10 years ago, and 5 years from now, it's not going to be the same thing we have today. So there's always going to be a churn in terms of what happens in your town center. And so, I'd love to be able to say we'd come back and you're going to see all sorts of boutiques along Windsor Avenue. Hopefully we'll get a handful. We'll be able to attract and the folks that are here. Maybe somebody will look, maybe some folks on Quantic Avenue, some of the little shops there will say, something, I can have an even better presence over on Broad Street now that they've made these adjustments, which then frees up that spot on the Quantic for a new startup to begin. So
Sorry, how many parking spaces are we talking about?
we're talking under this concept here, we're talking approximately adding about 45 to 50 spaces along this stretch, if under this concept. Moving here in orange.
I've got an idea, and I don't know anything about this, but I also don't know anyone, so I'm gonna go for it. And it's dumb, but I love the idea of shortening the length for pedestrians and adding some parking. But rather than adding bump outs on both sides to narrow the road, adding paved bike paths to make it safer, and parallel parking, which a lot of people are not fabulous of, and backing out of it or backing into it can slow the flow of traffic. What about, instead of altering both sides, we simply did the diagonal parking on one side, say for instance, the southbound, which is probably not as busy as the northbound lane, have all of the parking spaces in front of all of those businesses, which would narrow what's left of the road, because everything on the lower half, the town hall, the post office, CVS, has considerable parking on that side. I wonder if that was a thought at all. It made it easier for paving. I mean, not paving.
Snow removal.
Snow
That's
pulling in
yeah.
faster for a lot of people.
right. I know that diagonal parking is going to be, I think, they're going to be, unfortunately, the diagonal portion is going to be a non-starter with the state. Unfortunately, I'm not going to speak for the DOT. It's been probably 6 or 7 years since we had that conversation, so my recollection probably will be skewed. And so, I think it's just it's a safety, and it's a concern that they have.
You'd be backing out into traffic.
Backing it in, so I think that's that. So I think West Hart. I think that they would call that West Hartford Center does have that, and I think there's some other communities that have that, but it's been there for for decades. So West Hartford, that section of West Hartford does have a broader I believe it's two through lanes and a turn lane. But
South Main Street. South Main Street is only one lane with the diagonal parking.
The one lane.
Yeah.
So.
I drove the fire truck there for 10 years. Are you sure?
I think there was a couple questions.
Okay, has anybody taken into consideration 91 when there's an accident? Like that lady said, her neighborhood is, I grew up in that neighborhood, and I know what those side streets are. When you got an accident on 91, there's no way this is going to work without an accident.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't work today. And that's the challenge that I don't think there's any way to be able to design for that happens. Unfortunately, it does happen more than a couple times a year, and it doesn't. The road system as we currently have it doesn't function well, and I think what we're looking to do is look at the majority of the 365 days. And
An accident. There was one again this morning on 91. Exit, 38, between 38 and 37. Now I live off of the Black Avenue now, and sometimes I can't get out of my street, and that just goes into the center of town. It's not going to work.
so it's certainly something that we have thought about, and I guess in not to be disrespectful, but I think we are looking at what is that. How do we arrive at something that helps to bring continue to bring town center with some vitality and the pedestrian safety, but those incidents are going to happen, and today, and how do we make sure there's an environment that when they're not happening, that it's an environment that's safer for pedestrians and more conducive for a town center. But it's certainly not dismissing the fact that 91 they're going to have accidents on 91. So I think there was a question or comment.
I just want to have you all kind of clarify this a little bit, because going with the YouTube video that we started with, we don't have right now dedicated turn lanes to get into CVS, if you want to go to Windsor Federal, if you want to go into Geisler's, anything like that. And that slows up traffic every single day. But if we have those kind of dedicated turn lanes like you're proposing, that will keep the traffic flowing maybe even better than it's going right now, or at least just as much kind of thing. So
That's a good point.
so that even if there were to be some accident on 91, I live on Capen and it gets terrible on Capen. But that it would be roughly about the same impact as it would right now. Yes?
It could, it certainly could. I mean, I think on an everyday basis, it's going to be efficient. And that's as the initial traffic capacity analysis shows, that it will be, the signals will work with the proper timing, because you don't have that, that stopping and going and as much weaving as you have in the conditions today. So, yes, ma'am.
How long is it estimated that it would take for complete construction from the time the shovel goes in the ground until everybody can use the road with no interruption?
That's an excellent question, and Adam or Bill, I can hazard a very educated guess, but I'm going to look to.
This is typically I would say construction season, so I would say tractoring 6 months, streetscape improvements, get in place, and then getting rid of the overlay. I would say if we condition in mind for say April through November, and some of this work might be staggered, it's not necessarily every day, because like right now we're short of metal and everything, so the signal work might lag a little bit because of water and stuff. I have trying to get it in. So I would plan for a full construction season, but just remember we're going to be working mostly on the curb, so traffic will be able to flow through. It's not, you're not going to be in the middle of the road working for most parts. I think your disruption will be as severe as a typical construction project we see on say I-9.
Well, I can remember the last time the center of town was reconfigured, especially that area where the roads all converge. And I know there were businesses that were shut down because everybody who knew what was going on would hit what we call the back streets. And with the drop in traffic on Broad Street, I know of at least 2, if not more, businesses that finally said they couldn't make a go of it because they lost all of that.
And there's certainly that's certainly a factor. And as if the project moves forward, that's part of those planning considerations, and working very closely with the merchants, with First Town Downtown, the Chamber of Commerce, to be able to, and really on a public relations and PR and information basis, to make sure that folks understand that these businesses are operating. But as Bill said, this is not like several years ago we rebuilt Prospect Hill Road, and that was a full depth reconstruction, and it was a major construction project with all sorts of utilities involved. Here, as we see it now, there's not a lot of utility work. There's not relocation of the overhead power lines. There's not a lot of utility storm drainage that crosses the street. There may be in 1 or 2 places, but that can be segregated. So it's a little bit of a different construction project. But we certainly would need to make sure that we have a really good public information plan coordinated with all the businesses in support. So I think there was some folks there just behind you. Yeah.
I have a question. I'd like to focus on the area of Elm Street south to the hardware store.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an update, or give me an update on the status of the plaza building?
I'd love to. First off, that's a privately owned building. The property owner has done substantial renovation of the mechanical systems within that building: air conditioning, plumbing, electric. service. He has essentially completed the renovation of, I can't remember if it's 8 or 9 apartments on above. They've renovated those apartments. As if you go by, you can sneak a peek in the window and you can see the restaurant space has been outfitted. What, as I understand it from speaking to the property owner, they're looking for a operator for the food establishments. And as we see in the news every day, restaurant business is not necessarily the greatest business to be in. But there has been, I can say that there's been substantial amount of dollars and effort put into restoring that building. The back theater, you would not recognize. That has been turned into a multi-use event type of space where it's been leveled off. There's 2 levels, so it can be smaller, more intimate gatherings, and then larger gatherings that could be, whatever, a corporate family, reunion, wedding, or something like that. So, so I think right now they're really looking for operators to be able to come in and run the food establishments. Don't have a timeline. Certainly, as I look out my window every day, I was like, I'd love to go over there and get a bite to eat, and hopefully we will be able to sooner rather than later.
Wouldn't it make sense to have, I mean, if the apartments or the second floor has been rehabilitated or whatever, wouldn't it make sense to get people into that building so it doesn't look so desolate all the time that you go by?
I agree, and if I was the owner of that property, that's what I think I would be doing.
I take this as an example all the time. I went on a Windsor Historical Society architectural tour about, it's got to be 3 years at least. And Neil was there and, was telling us about the plans for the building and everything. And he said, oh, we were going to go in and walk. I mean, look at how many years it's been and it's still vacant. I mean, at least we had 2 or 3 people in these apartments with some lights on.
I don't disagree, and
I know.
it certainly is it's a great asset, and hopefully it can be back online. But I do want to stress that there has been a significant amount of that building was basically going to be, if that current property owner had not invested the money, that building would not be here today. I can say that in all honesty. Certainly wish it had happened faster and quicker, but certainly that historical building is at least for the time being is saved, and if we just got to bring it to life. I think there's another, yes.
Getting back to this project, there's how many, well, there's a certain timeline you're providing to finally come to a real presentation as far as this is just the beginning, right?
This is that stage of, we'll probably, I want to say, Adam hates this when I do this, but I would say we're probably 35–40% in design.
Then when it is finally done, or finally when you think it's full design, do we get to do any voting on it or referendum? Any kind of anything so that
You are skipping ahead of my agenda, so great, awesome, great. So so what it will come down to is, yes, there's decisions that the town council will make regarding acceptance of state grants. So depending upon when this project is brought forth in its totality, there's, by our town charter, there's certain dollar thresholds that will require, certain ones will allow project sizes, will let the town council vote on it. At this time, as with this working estimate, it would require a vote of either at a special town meeting, which allows any registered voter in town to vote on it. And depending upon that what that final dollar estimate is, it may actually require a referendum. And so that's kind of the time, because that's not a fixed number. As some know, that is based upon a percentage of our tax levy. And so that changes every year. So But as it stands right now, it would minimum require a town meeting, very well could require a referendum for a vote. And that takes some time to get established. So I think there's another hand or two, I think, Bill.
Yes, so we talked about 6 months construction, but how far are we to getting to that 6 months? You talked about a little bit over years. You.
Somebody said a crystal ball before.
We have 10 years on it.
Nope.
We have another 10 years
No,
before
if
across the streets.
I will not have any hair left in 10 years. And I would say that within the year, within calendar year 23 would be, it's really assembling of, first we got to, finish the design, move to that design to the next stage, answer some of the questions that you folks have raised this evening, and then really work towards how do we assemble the funding. Is it additional state funds? Is it use of the federal funds that the town council would allocate and decide? Is it local dollars and a local match? So I would say over the course of the remainder of 22 into the winter of 23. I can't believe I'm saying 2023. But in that time frame would I think you'll be seeing certain decisions all the way along that timeline, and including the next one of the next decisions will be moving this design forward to full design with using those state dollars, that $200,000 that will take an agreement between the town and the state of Connecticut to move forward. So there'll be some decision points later this summer / early summer, the spring, early summer. Dick, I think you had
Construction wise, daytime stuff, or we get to listen to the operatic songs of construction equipment at 1 o'clock in the morning?
excellent question. I would think that the majority of the curbing work will be done during the bulk of it will be done during the day. Obviously managing off-peak hours in terms of any kind of milling and overlay paving could be some degree of overnight. I would imagine. I would think.
Yeah, I think this is right. I think the nighttime, mirrors and papers and massive equipment, just for safety, it makes sense to get in the nighttime. Maybe 7 p.m. and maybe 5 a.m. and get done and trade away from this in the daytime.
So as Bill said earlier, the way this can, majority of this could be done, I would envision them doing, segments once, the south side of the east side of the road, perhaps segment. So the road wouldn't, as I said, would not be a Prospect Hill Road where it's opened up and it'd be a full-blown construction project. So the traffic would still be able to travel, and majority of the business could be open other than some intermediate closure. So, any other thoughts, questions, Ron?
So why not, and I'll just throw it out, why not just reline the street now, which probably could be done within a matter of 3 or 4 months, and allow the residents to have an opportunity to see what's this really going to look like? Paint in your bump outs, put a planter on either side, put in lines of parking spaces. What are we talking? $250,000 maybe? I have no idea what paint costs. But when the state,
It's more than the cost a month ago, I can tell you that.
But I mean, that would allow us to see how it works, and also allow us, without having to spend a whole mess of money, to decide, oh, this is not going to work in a bad situation on a regular basis. Because once you've committed effectively $4 or $5 million, it's not going to be undone.
That's a great question, great suggestion. One of the biggest hurdle, and perhaps the hurdle that is not be able to be reached, is the alignment of the traffic signals and the timing of the traffic signals, because all the heads on the mast arms where the lights are, signal lights, all have to be adjusted to line up with the new channelization. the good Yankee in me would love to be able to do that. To be able to work with DOT to get the cost to do that rearranging is something that we can explore with them, but from a little bit of intel from some other communities that have wanted to do that, wasn't well received. West Hartford did some experimenting, but West Hartford it was a different context. So if you read those stories, it was there was not, they didn't have the 3 or 4 lights right in the way. But we certainly can explore that with DOT. I think it's going to be a hurdle that we might not be able to quite get both legs over. Yes, sir.
Say it was done and DOT agreed to that, would that be the final construction or the final alignment of those signals, or would there need to be new poles put across?
What we're imagining based upon some information that we've got from DOT is that given the age of their infrastructure, the signal infrastructure, is that it would have to be total replacement of both the stanchion pole and the arm, as well as all the electronics, just because of the age of those. So love to be able to make that adjustment and say, okay, but I think DOT would be more than hesitant. But I have no problem asking.
So if I may, just for clarification, so DOT's already saying, okay, at some point in the next 10 years or less, all that equipment's got to be replaced. I didn't notice today. I was down in, the heck was I? I was down in Cheshire, and they had the big boring units that you go into the ground to put up the stent. They were replacing lights all over the place.
So to my knowledge, the state of Connecticut does not, the state of Connecticut has, just like the town does, they have a long-term capital improvement plan. And so I do not believe that these signals along Route 159 or Route 305 are in that, I'll say, short-term horizon. They do a 20-year plan. So I'm certainly not in the short-term horizon of that plan.
19 years, 5 months from now.
So,
Thank you.
So, question.
Just one question. The planters that are in front, or the median, I guess, with all the plants in front of Geisler's parking lot and the hardware store, are those going to remain or taken out?
I think they get modified to a point. Now let's see, where are we here? That's Batchelder. Those essentially stay in that section, stay the same right in front of between the library and Geisler's. If you go to further to the north, Scott. So in front of the Plaza building, you can kind of see the light shaded. So it does get modified.
What, smaller?
It
Modified.
That one, a good portion of it will be eliminated to make room for that left turn pocket.
I'm sorry.
That one in particular in front of the Plaza building, a good portion of it will be eliminated in order to make room for the left turn pocket to Elm Street.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everyone coming out with the great questions, great input, things that the design team will certainly look at as we move to the next stage of design. We will be looking to get that stage moving over the course of the summer, which will provide additional information for future community gathering. I would say, we'd be towards the latter part of the summer, early part of the fall, as we start to incorporate these ideas and other engineering aspects, such as further details related to the traffic capacity analysis. So we are available. We do have, if you folks want it, we do have these plans in in hard copy if you want. Look right at, X, Y, and Z site. We can roll those out and folks are more than happy to peruse those and ask us questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming out and we will see you about town.